We're going to talk about dynamic apex. With respect to dynamic SOCL and dynamic SOSL, we've already covered these, and all we're referring to is you can use database.query to do a string-based SOCL query that's dynamically generated at runtime. So those two aren't too different from what we've already talked about, but schema describe is something we have not talked about. All right, so schema describe, what this is for is schema describe is for programmatically inquiring about your data model, okay? It gives you the ability to do something like return for me all of the pick list values for this pick list, okay? So if I'm going to be, maybe I'm going to be rendering a drop-down list, a select list in a Visualforce page, I want to populate that with all of the available pick list options, or maybe a better example would be radio buttons, which is not the default UI. I could then programmatically inquire, what are all the available pick list options for this particular field, okay? Another classic thing is to be able to access the label associated with a field or an object for that matter, okay? You've already seen an implementation of schema describe. And what we've seen is a list of all of the objects and all of the fields associated with those objects and all the relationships. Can anyone think of the tool that I'm referring to that's using schema describe functionality? Exactly, the schema browser within the Force.com IDE. Exactly. So we got back a list of all of our objects, and then we could expand it and get back all the fields. So if you were, let's say you were going to create some sort of Apex version of the schema browser, you could do that on your own by using this schema.get global describe. And what this would do is this would be the starting point for obtaining all of the metadata for all of the objects and fields within your org. Now, the way that it works is that we actually have a couple of things which happen here. And I'm going to spell this out a little bit differently than the way it's displayed on the slide. So it's a little bit different in the sense that we're going to be working with these things called tokens, and we're going to be working with these things called describe results. So using the get global describe, you are going to, on an object basis, you're going to get back a map of tokens. And the idea is the map is a string to token map. In other words, the key, the string, is the name of the S object. So account position _C. So what's a token? A token is a lightweight reference to that particular object. So one of the reasons we have this is when you call get global describe, we don't want to return all of the metadata associated with every object because that would take up a huge amount of memory. Instead, we return these things called tokens, and tokens are essentially this key, if you will, associated with each of our objects that we have within our org, whether they're standard or custom objects. So from the map of the names of our objects to the tokens, we can obtain the individual token for a specific object. So we start off with get global describe. We start off with the map. From the map, we can get the token. And the token is, like I said, that very lightweight reference. From the token, we can get something called the describe result. The describe result is the thing that has the metadata for that object. So this is the one that takes up a lot more memory. And we're able to say, okay, return for me the token for account, and then using the token for account, give me the describe result for the account object. Okay? Now, part of the piece of metadata associated with an object describe result is the fields associated with it, right? So now, on a field basis, from the describe result, we can obtain the map of all of the fields associated with that object. From that map, we can obtain the token for an individual field, and then using the token for the field, we can receive or obtain the describe result. So that's the way that that works. Using the global describe, we are able to get the map of all of the objects, and then we then get the tokens, then the describe results, of which we can obtain a map of all the fields, and so on. Okay? All right. So let's take a look at this in some code. Here is a list of the different types of describe results. So the object result, the field result. There's also the child relationship associated with getting the list of all the child relationships. Otherwise, when you're going up to the parent, it's just a field. What's explained here in words is what I drew for you in that little diagram that I did. So you start out with a global describe, you obtain the token. From the token, you obtain the describe result, and then you can obtain the map for the fields. So let's take a look at this example and the way it works within code. So up here, we have the call to get global describe, and what we get back is this schema map. And from here, so now, just so you know, this is an academic example, so you wouldn't have this hard-coded, but we're just doing it for that purpose. You would probably be past this in a method, and you could dynamically figure it out. But what we're going to do is from the global describe schema map, we would obtain the token for, in this case, the account. This results in the token dot get describe. We now have the describe result for that object. A piece of metadata associated with an object is all of the fields. And so with the describe result, there's this dot fields dot get map. We now have the map of all of our field tokens. Here, once again, we've hard-coded in the industry field. What we would do is obtain the token for that field, call get describe. We now have the describe result associated with the field. And one of the things we could do is, in this case, this one is a pick list, get all of our industry pick list values. So now we can access those, iterate over them, and then choose to display them or whatever it is that we'd like to do. Okay? From an existing S-object, you can obtain its token. So all you would do is, if here I have an account, I'm just going to say a1.getSObjectType. I now have the token for that. You can actually generate a new record, so a new instance of an S-object, from the token. Okay, so we could do that. Or once we have the token, we could call getDescribe. So we have an S-object, we obtain the token from the S-object, we then call getDescribe, we now have access to its metadata, right? Okay. There's actually some notation, we'll see it tomorrow when we take a look at Visualforce controllers. If we know the field that we want to access, remember actually, if we know it ahead of time, we don't have to get the entire map and then drill down. We can just do schema dot and then position _C dot fields dot and then obtain the token that way. So industry or whatever it is that we wanted to grab. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. And we'll see an example of that. You actually saw something like this when we were talking about Apex sharing. Remember we had our sharing reason? So that was expressed using schema dot and then that notation. All we're talking about when we talk about dynamic SOQL is the ability to do a query against the database using a string. Same thing goes for SOSL. One thing that you want to be aware of is the possibility of an injection attack, where what someone will do is, if you're doing a lookup, you could obtain a true result by typing either, in the case of a standard database, some SQL, or typing, in our case, some SOQL into that field. And the basic idea is this, is that you'd want, the person who's typing it in would do something like, enter in your password, and instead of entering in a password, they'd type in the string and, they type in or 1 equals 1. And so the idea is that by injecting that bit of SQL or SOQL into your database query, if you dynamically build up that query, it gets sent over the database, and it says, changes the query to be, is this password good, or does 1 equal 1? It returns back true. Now the person who typed that into that field has now gained access to your system. Okay? The SQL injection has been used in a number of cases. The way you guard against it is you escape single quotes. So in other words, when the user attempts to type in that string into that field, by escaping the single quotes, you essentially mangle what they've attempted to do, and then the query will simply fail, be a query exception, and that will be the end result of their attack. Okay? All right, let's see here. Dynamic DML. Okay, so dynamic DML is where we can perform DML without knowing the concrete S-object type of what we are writing to the database. So in other words, DML operations support the S-object type. And here we have an example. So we're saying we have our method up here, which is modify any S-object. We're passing the record to update. We don't know what it is. And then the field to modify and the value to put. So you could create a method like this where we call put on the S-object. We are going to identify the field we want to modify and then the new value. And then say update. Whatever this thing is, we don't know what it is, nor do we know what field the user just updated. Update that record in the database. Now in this case, here we have some code. So we have our contact. We insert it into the database so it exists. And then we call our method down here. Let's focus on line 8. We call our method and we pass a reference to our contact record and we say change the last name to Benioff. Okay? The advantage of this is you could create generic methods for, let's say, inserting data into the database, create your own exception handling logic, and essentially you have a wrapper for performing DML where you have universal exception handling logic, and now you can use it with positions, you can use it with accounts, you can use it with any of the S objects. Okay? Pretty powerful feature and something to take advantage of. There is a minor problem with line 7, which is this is a new account, but we're doing an update, so you'd probably want to do an upsert. But anywho, all right.